Thank you very much for inviting me to present our work. As you can see, I will be talking about the biotic pump, and this biotic pump was described when, as long as I can remember myself, I was working with Professor Viktor Gorshkov, and unfortunately he couldn't be here, and it is very bad for us all, because I'm like, you know, a pale shadow of him in terms of everything. So, but anyway, I'll try to do my best. If you have any questions, we have more materials on our website, which is here, bioticregulation.ru, and you can anytime contact us and with questions. So, I will just briefly tell you what the biotic pump is about. And to understand that, we need to understand the quantitative aspects of the water cycle on land. And this is what, as we all know, as land is elevated over the ocean, all water that exists on land, most of it, goes down due to gravity. So we need this continuous continuous reverse flow of air, of water vapor, which cannot go through the surface because the friction is very high, and the only way to quickly transport moisture back to land is via the atmosphere. And so, to give you an idea how immediate is this need to replenish, thank you very much, to replenish the moisture store. Just think that all water that we have on land could run off to the ocean in just a few years, according to the existing estimates. So all water in soil, in lakes, in rivers, in glaciers, everywhere that we have, if we divide it by the existing runoff, it will disappear just in a few years. So we need a continuous inflow of moisture through the atmosphere. And when we have moisture on land, we can have green life and forests, and they evaporate. There is evaporation or transpiration, which is controlled by plants, by their genetic program. And so we have this upward flux of moisture, and we have condensation in the rising air, because in order for condensation to occur, the air must rise, and then we have condensation and rainfall, and dry air returns to over the ocean in the upper atmosphere. So the ultimate source of moisture is the ocean, evaporation from the ocean, and this the water cycle is enhanced in terms of rainfall by transpiration from plants and evaporation from the land surface. And so the biotic pump is a concept which says that if we have forests, natural forests on land, we have this moisture inflow, which is stable and sufficient for life to exist and to replenish the moisture losses to runoff. If we destroy the forest, we won't have this incoming moisture, and the land will desertify. So this is the very the core of the biotic pump concept, this statement about the impact of forests on the incoming moisture. So on this atmospheric flow, and for there to be a moisture import, there must be wind from the sea, and there must be rising air motion over land. Oh, somehow it doesn't work. Oh, anyway, somehow there should be some pictures doing something interesting, but I'll tell you in any case. So how it works in physical terms, because different audience require more or less details, so I need to say something. And the key to this concept in physical terms is the fact that the atmosphere has two fundamental scales in the vertical dimension. One is the hydrostatic scale, which is the height our atmosphere would have if we distributed the air uniformly. So took all air and make a uniform layer of it. So it would be around 10 kilometers thick with the density which we have at the surface. Not 10, but 9. So this is how the air is distributed in the atmosphere. If we know that it gradually declines, the air density, when you go to the mountains, there is less air there. So this scale height dictates this air distribution. But besides, there is another fundamental scale in the atmosphere, which concerns water vapor. The fact is that water vapor is a condensable gas, which means that you cannot have more than a certain amount of this gas at a certain temperature. If you have more, it will condense into droplets or snowflakes and leave the gas phase. And so it happens that when the water vapor begins to rise with the remaining air, like willing to decrease its density as in the mountains, it cools so much that it condenses. So if it didn't condense, it would become oversaturated, that is, go above the permissible threshold, which is permitted by the physical properties of the water molecules. And so actually this removal of water vapor by condensation leads to the situation when the scale height of water vapor is it depends on temperature, and it depends on lapse rate, on how fast the temperature drops with height, but it is only 2 kilometers, around 2 kilometers on average. So we have these two different scales, and due to this reason, when the moist air rises and moisture condenses, we obtain a vertical pressure gradient due to disappearance of the water vapor, and it is these gradients that pulls the air upward and drives the circulation. And why our work received considerable traction in the literature and raised interest is that we not just presented as an idea or a possibility, but we calculated the wind power which would result from this mechanism and contrasted it with the available observations, showing that the theoretical predictions of our concept match well the available observations on wind power. And wind power is just the product of wind and pressure gradient, of wind velocity and pressure gradient. And so the main scale for potential energy and for kinetic energy in the atmosphere becomes the partial pressure of water vapor. It is the amount, the maximum pressure difference which could be realized due to condensation. And it is just around say, if we look at its value at the tropics, it is about 40 hectopascals, and if you have some knowledge of hurricanes, it is approximately what is observed in the hurricanes, excluding the eye. And so, returning to how the biotic pump works, now we can see that forest enriches the atmosphere with moisture, then the moisture rises, and so we have the formation of this vertical pressure gradient which pulls the air upward, and as the air goes upward, there is a pressure deficit at the surface, and so we have this pressure difference now in the horizontal dimension between the sea and the forest, if there is a sea nearby, and then this pressure gradient drives moist winds there, and we have this circulation wind which brings water to land. And so here we can see K process is the air moistening by the forest, because if the atmosphere here is dry and we don't have this upward this enrichment of the atmosphere with moisture, then the process will stop. And the forest must be able to store water in soil. You always need to have some water from which you will evaporate and transpire. And it must be able to transpire efficiently, so it must have a high leaf area index. And it also have to be able to switch condensation on and off as needed. Because we know that 2/3 of our planet is occupied by the oceans, and condensation, the same mechanism works in the ocean too. So in this way, the forest must win the tug of war with the ocean for moisture, and it must have a higher potential for evaporation than the ocean does. And as Douglas mentioned, it is indeed the case, because forest which has a high leaf area index, it can evaporate more efficiently from these many surfaces, unlike the ocean, which has a leaf area index equal to unity. And so if we have an extensive and healthy forest, we have this moist air and the biotic pump actioning. Then if we destroy it, but the evaporation is always there over the ocean. Now the same mechanism will dry air to the ocean, and the land will desertify. And now I will tell you how important. So, apart from other things that the biotic pump controls the water cycle, I will tell you now that how important it is that it impacts air circulation over large distances. Like, for example, the most powerful biotic pump on Earth is the Amazon biotic pump, which acts across several thousand kilometers in the tropics. So this is why air circulation is important for climate and for climate change. These are results from the study of Marvel et al. In Nature Climate Change, which are mainstream climate group, and they took a modern global circulation model, global climate model, and so what happened if they change some parameters of atmospheric turbulence such that the atmospheric power increased. So actually they increased the atmospheric power from slightly less than up to about 2.5 times its present value. Currently, the Earth generates winds at a rate of about 2.5, you can memorize it like 3 watts per square meter. So they made it, change parameters in the model such that it doubles or triples. And you can see the circulation. These are circulation. Somehow it doesn't work either. But the upper panel to the left shows those circulation cells, like Hadley cells in the southern and northern hemisphere, and then Ferrel cells and polar cells are not shown. When they increase the circulation power, the Hadley cells, those where there are trade winds, spread to the pole. So all our Earth can be covered just by 2 cells, one in each hemisphere, stretching from the equator to the pole. There is no physical obstacle. There is nothing that could prevent it. But the most interesting thing, that the global temperature in this model, when they did this, just increased the circulation power. And to give you an idea of scale, wind power is just 3 watts per square meter. while the solar radiation flux is around 200, 300 watts per square meter. So it is a tiny power of total energy flux on Earth. But the global temperature declined by 12 degrees. By 12 degrees from the current 15 degrees mean global annual temperature, mean degrees Celsius, by more than 10 degrees. And they didn't make any conclusions out of that because they were just interested in how much wind power we can extract. But this means that if we change circulation on a regional, on a significant scale, we could have either cooling or global or warming on a global scale of magnitude that is at least comparable to what we are witnessing now, a few Kelvin.
5 minutes.
Okay. So I wanted to show you how actually, so suppose we forget everything about carbon dioxide and concentrate on forests. And we know that forests in recent years had a very complex history of being destroyed and recovering. Like with the development of our industrial civilization, you see, these are years, the forest consumption, and this is you see, this is wood consumption. It was continuously increasing, and the area occupied by forests continuously decreasing. When we began to use fossil fuels, first coal, and then petroleum, oil, you see, exactly when they reached how much we took from wood, this is data for the US, immediately people stopped using wood and the forest began to regrow. These are data for the US. This is data for land cover. The same process occurred in Russia, but it was delayed since we're not in the avant-garde of progress, but the same occurred in Russia. So in a way that we started using fossils, it saved our forests. And this is, you can see the process is highly nonlinear. And if we think of the climate change, that it is not linear either, while CO2 emissions are quite predictable. Oh, sorry. And later in the 20th century, in the second half, accelerated tropical deforestation. So we can see that if we associate climate change with forest decline, we shouldn't be surprised that it doesn't go straight upward, which is the case. It doesn't. And I just want to explain to you, it is not our mechanism, but it was proposed by Bates, Professor Bates, an Irish professor, how it works, why forests could cool the planet globally. So basically, greenhouse gases, which is water vapor and CO2, they are concentrated near the surface. And solar radiation reaches the surface. It is transferred to thermal radiation, and thermal radiation is radiated upward, is met by greenhouse gases, and as you will see there, without forest, is radiated back. So Earth's surface warms, and it must emit more to remain in balance. So, and when the greenhouse gases grow, their amount now it is doubled. So they can be seen like a shield against thermal radiation. So you need to have more and more here such that these two match. So this is warming. But look now if we have forest. The forest captures a certain part of solar radiation due to evaporation. It captures its latent heat. And latent heat condensation is released at a mean height of 5 kilometers in the atmosphere. So it is released here, while the majority of greenhouse gases are located beneath. And so from this level, it can go practically unimpeded to space. So capturing heat here as water vapor, forests allow this energy to escape this trap and to be emitted more straightforwardly. And so at the same concentration of greenhouse in this case, the temperature of the Earth's surface will be lower. Remove this and you will get the picture there.
2 minutes.
Okay, I'm accelerating. So, another point which I wanted to tell you is that I showed you that there is a field for climatologists evaluating forests. But also, it is also a field for ecologists, because here we deal with a fundamental instability problem of the biosphere. We need for biotic pump to function, we need trees, because they need to control evapotranspiration and they need to control losses of water from the surface. And for that end, they need closed canopy and they need the inversion of temperature gradient under the canopy, which grasses cannot ensure. So we must have huge biomass on land. Most of it, it is the wood. Most of wood is metabolically inactive. So, and metabolism is concentrated in leaves and roots. And if you have a look at the gross primary productivity, 2 watts per square meters, it is consumed by leaf plants and small decomposers like bacteria and fungi. But large animals like we, due to the universal biochemical nature of life, we all consume about 1 watt per kilogram. This is a universal biochemical rhyme of all life. So large animals consume per unit ground surface area which we occupy thousands of times and hundreds of times more than the biosphere produces. And what does it mean? It means that these animals, large animals including us, must destroy the biosphere, while a bacteria can sit under the tree and just wait when dead leaves fall down and it eats away and never disturbs the living tree. A large animal cannot do that. It must move from one place to another, eat away biomass and introduce disturbances. So this is an inherent instability of the ecological system on land. Ocean is organized in an entirely different way. And so all big animals produced by evolution are potentially destroyers of biomass. And so practically, especially in Africa, those climate fluctuations, when you suddenly have a dry climate and then a wet climate, could be consequences of ecological catastrophes when this destruction by large animals went out of control. When some animals were produced by evolution who could not stabilize their population density. And they destroyed the biosphere and the biotic pump, and the dryness followed. And just as a curiosity, hurricanes work in the same way. So this is, we skip. And so, also it is very important that you have which forest you have. If you have deciduous forest, it won't work because in spring it still has to make leaves. So if you change conifers to deciduous, the biotic pump can function chaotically. And so it is very important that the forest remains functional. So all species are important because they all perform some function, and there is currently a conflict because the commercial value of forests and their hydrological competence. And we should have our eyes open to this controversy, because Commercial value of forest is maximized at 50, 70 years when the productivity begins to decline and people like to remove forest at this time, while the hydrological competence of forest is maximized where the forest acquires all this full genetic potential and the population densities of all organisms achieve their optimal values. So, and the last sentence, that there is a lot of forest destruction in Russian forests now, and this is especially in the northwest near the sea, so it immediately it disrupts all the other forests from the moisture source, and this can have to do with the drought which you have in Central Europe, because this huge biotic pump, here's the map, this, which is 7,000 kilometers long and several hundred kilometers thick, it provides moisture to the entire continent. So this Eurasian forest belt is our common legacy, and we need to somehow cooperate, Russia and the European Union and China, to keep it functionable. That's it. Thank you very much.